Hello and welcome to In the Court of the Wenton Knave. This is a historic moment. It's about time we did this album, really. One way or the other. Bit of a crisis of confidence because there's a bit of a expectation hanging in the air, if you get that joke. The question is, how do I review this album? The answer is I don't. I'm just going to say some facts, talk about some riffs, and say, hey, it's a good album, so that's fine. It's fine, it's not a problem. I'm not worthy. It's just mini reviews. Yeah, so technically the previous video is Jules and Fripp. Little bit of an edit there, I hope you didn't notice that, but yeah, shortly after the Jules and Fripp album was released, they got hold of Judy Dyble, who was actually in Fairport Convention before Century Schizoid Man, with Ian McDonald as well. And one of the things they wrote was I Talk to the Wind, among loads of other things. He joined the band. I get the impression they were called Jules, Fripp and McDonald at one point, and Judy Dyble left. There is supposedly a version of I Talk to the Wind with Judy Dyble that isn't on the massive remaster of double DVD huge version. Ian McDonald was in the army, strange thing to say, but while he was there he joined a swing band. He didn't really want to go to the army, he wanted to be a musician, but he obviously took that to his advantage and joined a swing band. And supposedly he heard stuff like Day Tripper and We Can Work It Out by the Beatles, and obviously he wasn't there, he wasn't in London where it was happening. Obviously it was happening in London, and I think that's significant in that he couldn't just go there and do the stuff, man, like the Kinks or something. It wasn't so much, I can do that. It was, by the time he got there, it was like, well, what can I do, he brought with him this swing influence, which I think is really important. It's kind of a big band thing he was doing, but I think it's specifically the notion of swinging and that sort of big band fanfare thing as well. Also, he met in another band, Peter Sinfield, and allegedly he did actually say, well, your band's crap, but I like your lyrics. I don't know whether he really said that, but who was actually a programmer in the 60s. That's a whole different thing. I go back to machine code and assembly language, but he goes back to punch tape. That's not even typing binary if you're doing it in the 60s. But often programmers are very creative people, and supposedly his English teacher said he's seldom seen such an old head on such young shoulders. And you're not kidding. It's amazing. You think the age of these guys when they did this. Greg Lake was 21, particularly Peter Sinfield, because the lyrics are just have such profundity. They're just so incredibly memorable. They're etched on the monolith of rock. And I think he kind of got worse after that. But before he'd come along to Jules and Fripp, Ian McDonald and Peter Sinfield had actually written an early version of In the Court together. I think Peter Sinfield had written a different In the Court with the different music before that as well, interestingly. But they did record a few songs, including Drop In, or Why Don't You Just Drop In, as it was called then. And Ian McDonald brought his arranging ability to the band. And around this time, I think they got their first proper gig. They got a residency, I think at Bob Monkhouse's club, strangely. But before they even got there, the Peter Giles Robert Fripp thing came to a head, and Fripp very typically basically said, it's him or me. I will leave and you can carry on, or Peter Giles can leave. Now, I'm sure from a logical perspective, that's perfectly reasonable, isn't it? That's a perfectly logical thing to say. It sounds like it's helpful. It's not saying, well, he's out, I'm going to stay, but it kind of ignores the personalities, it ignores the humanity of the situation in a way, doesn't it? And it's just purely logical. But ultimately, Peter Giles likes pop. He likes clever lyrics, nice whimsical pop. Robert Fripp obviously is a rock person, not a pop person at all. And what it actually was that Fripp recommended this guy he knew from Dorset, Greg Lake. Perhaps surprisingly, Fripp recommending Greg Lake. But they needed someone who was a frontman, and obviously Greg Lake's got that frontman thing. He's actually a guitarist. But they needed a bass player, and he was perfectly capable of playing the bass. Not as good a bass player as Peter Giles, apparently, but certainly good enough. Greg Lake was in the band called The Gods. The Gods! And the suggestion was, well, Lake, he can either replace Fripp or Giles, he could do either. But obviously the decision had to be made, and Peter Giles was ousted. Perhaps a little unfairly, because apparently he'd done all the work with Jules and Fripp, which was subsequently resolved to a certain extent. So they had their first, by the time they got to their first residency at Bob Monkhouse's club in Newcastle, apparently the club had like weekly themes. So this was the horror week, basically. So whether that was decided before or after King Crimson was the booking, and they were actually King Crimson, and they'd been decided, it was they were announced as, well, they've decided to call them King Crimson. It's going to be a freak out with King Crimson. And did they decide to make it a horror week because they were now called King Crimson, or did they call themselves King Crimson because it was a horror week they were playing? Who knows? They had the famous rehearsals at them in the basement of a cafe, and several things were played. Erudite Eyes was played. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds quite famously was played, and apparently there were live performances of that. Obviously Drop In, Why Don't You Just Drop In, and supposedly Lucky Man was played at the start. And it's one of those bands where it happened very quickly. As soon as that concept came together and that band came together, it wasn't just three people writing stuff, it was King Crimson. It happened very fast, much like Led Zeppelin, in that it was just a meteoric rise. The difference is with Led Zeppelin, Jimmy Page already knew the people and had Peter Grant, and he already had a band with the Yardbirds and everything. That wasn't there with King Crimson, so it is one of those amazing things. But yeah, the planets aligned, stuff happened, it was all very big and important, and there it is. That fantastic album cover, called An Uncanny Masterpiece by Pete Townsend. I bought it only 3 times, which for a King Crimson fan is good going. There's been about 15 releases of it. I've still got 2 of them here. I've got the 30th anniversary and the 40th anniversary. I bought Red more times, unfortunately. Now here's the thing. It has to be their most influential album. It's their most famous album. Top 100 albums of all time lists. That's the one that comes up. It's not their best album. I don't think it's their best album. I think the best was still to come. And actually, most controversially, it's probably one of the most controversial things I'm going to say in the whole series. This is not even the best album by this lineup, and they only did 1 album. It didn't capture their sound live. Now, a lot of people will disagree with that this captured a mojo, and I think it does. It captures the essence of what King Crimson are. But if I want to listen to 21st Century Schizoid Man, I'll put a live version on. Sometimes by this lineup, sometimes not. And I know, Michael Giles was not happy with the drum sound because it is kind of like hitting cardboard boxes a bit. I think the power of the music transcends that, and they get away with it in a way because the music's so good, and only by analysing it do you realise that. Having said all of that, I think for Crim noobs, I think that's the one to start with. If you've never heard any King Crimson, that's the one to start with. It's the one I started with. I got it when I was about 16. It wasn't until I was about 18 I got the Live in Japan 95, aka Deja Vroom, and that was the thing that hooked me in and got me hooked for life, really. Whereas I just thought this was a really good album and planned to buy more albums by them. The thing that interested me actually was that they didn't play 21st Century Schizoid Man, and I thought, that's interesting. I'm digressing a bit, but it was the trio of Vroom, followed by Frame by Frame, followed by Mate Kudasai, actually, which interested me. But obviously there's an essence in those songs that is here. Fripp talks about the good fairy. He talks about the King Crimson thing, how the planets align and everything came together. I think, in some sense, he sees it literally and actually believes stuff like that. In a way, I don't. But there's a lot more to talk about that, which we'll talk about another time. What is important to say is that it's almost the start of a different band. It's an alternate Crimson. This is the starting point, and King Crimson went off in that direction. And there were alternate Crimsons which could have potentially come out of this album, and we'll talk about that when we do In the Wake and McDonald's and Giles. Maybe we only got part of it, or maybe we got an alternative version of it. I don't know. Regardless, that essence of what's there is there and there. I think Ian McDonald's. I think there's 4 people there, well 5 people if you include Peter Sinfield, and they've all got this crucial role to play. There's no sidemen really. It's important to talk about Ian McDonald's contributions because he's influenced by the Moody Blues, I think, and you hear that on the album, and Fripp really isn't, and that disappeared immediately after following this album. I think that's a big deal, as well as Ian McDonald's arranging skills and his swing band tendencies, and I think his arranging skills would have helped at some point, and it also meant they didn't go in a certain direction as a result of that, I think. which we'll talk about. So yeah, Decca changed their mind and wanted them, but couldn't have them. Even at that early stage, Fripp didn't want to be part of the majors, and obviously signed to EG, which at the point were just a couple of guys basically with a plan. So let's do the first song. Obviously the songs have subtitles or subsections, so 21st Century Schizoid Man has a section called Mirrors. The reasons for doing that were to do with getting royalties. So because they've only got 5 songs on the album, they only get royalties for 5 songs. But obviously they aren't 3.5 minute pop songs, so then to justify that they named different sections of the songs, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that. There was the accusation of pretentiousness. Once again, it's not pretentious, it's just names of bits of a song. People read too much into things. The iconic sounds at the start, I don't mean the riff, I mean before the riff, it's the sound of a reed organ being turned on. Quite a scary sound. Hellish, Armageddon-like sound. I mean the whole album, and to a certain extent the whole of King Crimson, emotionally it's about Armageddon. If, you know, to be crass about it. And Fripp has described it as, you know, the heavy riffs. It's that relentless forward-driving motion of the unstoppable force of human spirit. There's got to be a link there. I mean, I do think this has to be the most influential song, purely for that matter. Black Sabbath talk about being influenced by Led Zeppelin. They're definitely influenced by this album. Surely. There's a grandiosity there that isn't on Led Zeppelin, I think. It's one of those things where it's written by several members of the band, because I think Greg Lake wrote that riff, actually. I think people would assume that it was written by Fripp, but it's not. Greg Lake wrote that, and he also supposedly wrote the C minor. I mean, that's a pretty insightful idea to do that and to sing over that. That's really heavy. I mean, and in 1969, no one had heard anything like that. I think Ian McDonald came up with which is clever because of course it links it to the middle section, Mirrors. And you know, originally called 3-4 because it was actually written but not performed actually when Ian McDonald was in the army, amazingly. But I think, you know, the riff does link it to, and it's a huge important thread in the whole of Crim. I mean, you know, you're very near to, you know, that's obviously a homage to that. Peter Sinfield's lyrics are fantastic. Obviously, one of his finest moments, possibly not his absolute finest moment, but the sort of 1984 Armageddon anti-capitalist, but you know, talking of a boot stamping on a human face forever. That's what that riff is. That's what that image is. Is obviously a critique of communism, actually. So that's interesting. The guitar solo, which is the first solo, a lot of people consider it definitive. I don't consider it definitive. Fripp can do better. I'm not entirely convinced that Fripp's guitar playing is suited to the song, actually. That's very controversial. You know, I mean, it's very much suited to saxophone and very much suited to Adrian Belews type of playing, actually, that kind of thing. And much more wild playing. Obviously, there's some great guitar solos later on, particularly, you know, Earthbound era. Tellingly, he didn't do the solo in '96. That's Belew who does the solo, not Fripp. That's interesting. Rather amusingly, there is an EP. This must have been deleted. It must have been. It's a Schizoid Man EP of all different versions of Schizoid Man. So you've got an edit, like a single edit, the original version, a live 69 version, a live 72 version with the Earthbound band, and a live 74 version with the Wenton band, which of course at the time left off the Belew version, which had been performed at the time but not released and probably not mixed or whatever, and it was only played about 6 times. So that's missing from it. And now of course there's the current band, Mark 8 or Mark 7 or whatever it is, their version of it as well, which obviously we haven't got yet, hasn't been mixed probably, we don't know, wasn't on the live album. But yeah, the sax solo. Now the sax solo is fantastic, and this is a moment where I think the album version is for once better than the live versions, because he couldn't get it awkward enough. Apparently he put himself in awkward situations like kneeling down on hard floor and trying to play and things like that to get it really, and it really is fantastic. And he didn't play anything like that intensely live. Actually, it's one of the few tiny points where that's the case. I mean, I suppose the other thing you could say is the big horns on 21st Century Schizoid Man and the vocals on In the Court of the Crimson King, when the big choir works better on the album. That sax solo might be the highlight of the album, actually. The other thing I haven't talked about, of course, is Michael Giles' drumming, which is on Giles and Fripp. Here found a home, if you like, and he didn't write any notes, but what he did with the drums is so special and so unique. It deserves the writing credit, because without those drums it would be a different song. You should listen to this track, unsurprisingly. Track 2, I Talk to the Wind. You can identify that without knowing. Perfect foil to Schizoid Man. It's folky, it goes down a bit. This is a McDonald Sinfield song, so it's not really a band song. It's Ian McDonald and Peter Sinfield wrote a song and they played it. Apparently the original version was in A, and it's also the introduction of the flute. Ian McDonald's flute playing, wonderful solo on there, one of his greatest moments, etc. Greg Lake is critical of the way he sung this, and I think I'll talk about this a bit more later. But he didn't like to sing it so soft, and I think that's significant that in his innocence he did something different he wouldn't have done later, and I think this is better. So there you go. Track 3 is Epitaph. It does include March for No Reason and Tomorrow. I'm not really sure where those sections are, because they aren't really separate sections as such. It's one song. This is a band piece. It's written by the band, and it is a big, epic thing. For some people, this is their greatest moment, and yet it was never performed live ever again. Not even in '71, surprisingly. It's epic. It is big and epic, and it's Metatrons, and that's an Ian McDonald thing, I think, bringing that in. The Moody Blues influence, as I said, and it's something that didn't really stay with King Crimson. King Crimson very rarely do epic. When they do, it's fantastic. I mean, the Starless, for example, Blizzard is epic. That's kind of about it. There isn't really anything else that's epic. It's not really that kind of thing, and here it really is. I think that's Peter Sinfield's finest lyrical moment. That's the one. And not just that, I mean the music as well is, just fantastic. Don't worry, I'm not going to sing. Track 4. We turn the record over now to Moonchild, and this is the first time on the album where things aren't definitive brilliant, in that it's an okay song. I like the way Greg Lake sings it in a very, very soft way. The song is okay. It's similar style to Talk to the Wind, but a bit more gentle. The big thing about it, of course, the original version was, on this, the 30th anniversary, and on the previous versions, I used to have the definitive version as well, which is the one before this. It's about 12 minutes of improvisation after the song, and it is subdued improvisation, which is fine. I don't think this lineup were particularly good at improvisation, nor do I think this is their best improvisation anyway. I think it kind of lets the album down a bit. With the 40th anniversary, obviously with the 40th anniversary you've got many different versions of the album, but the main part of the album, Moonchild, has been cut to about 9 minutes, and I can see why, because the very, very subdued stuff at the start is okay, it's a bit of improvisation, but towards the end of it is where it just kind of gets silly, and it's just a bit of a call and response thing, and just kind of noodling really. Later lineups were very good at improvisation. I'll leave it there for now. The question is, they did have other material. They had Travel Weary Capricorn. Maybe they wanted that attached to Mars, so they didn't use it. They had Drop In. They didn't use that. In terms of improvisation, I think I prefer Groon. Although Groon is technically Giles and Fripp. But anyway, track 5 is The Court of the Crimson King. It is a McDonald Sinfield song, as I said earlier. Obviously it's a big deal because it's The Court of the Crimson King. It's their most famous song of those two guys, obviously. I think a lot of people see the album as bookended by these great tracks. Hugely epic, obviously, quite amusingly. It's not my favourite. I think Epitaph is far and away better. For me, it's the first side of the record is the real definitive stuff on this album. It's good, but I don't think it's that good. To hear it live, in 1969 must have been an amazing experience. But again, it's not somewhere King Crimson really went very much, only towards the start kind of thing. You've got the big reprise, which I don't think they did live, where basically they're all just going mental and he's just whacking the mellotron and all that stuff, just to give it a nice big ending. Is it better live? Well, the live recordings are probably better. But like I said, it's okay. And there we have it, In the Court of the Crimson King. See you next week for Hyde Park.